just a quick note before the show. I forgot to mention I will be doing the Rattlecast this week, Monday, April 13th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. I will put a link in the show notes. This is the Rattle magazine has a weekly broadcast they do on YouTube. You can watch it afterward, recorded, but if you join in live, you can ask questions, you can participate. There's a whole long process. I don't know how. I think there's like a multi-phase thing. I'm going to be doing part of it, but my part will be at 8 p.m. I will read some poems. I will do some questions and answers. I will talk with Tim about God only knows what, but it should be fun. Join up, send me a note, say hi. Again, that is this Monday, April 13th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Come watch me do the Rattlecast with Tim Green, and I gotta figure out what the fuck I'm gonna read. No clue yet. We shall find out. I'm Matthew Buckley Smith, and you're listening to SLEERICKETS, a podcast about poetry and other intractable problems. So this morning at the bus stop, taking my daughter up to wait for the school bus, I ran into my neighbor, Kathleen. She said that she had just finished reading a really good book. It had really gotten into her head. She couldn't stop thinking about the characters. And when she got to the end, she skimmed the acknowledgments just because she said she's a librarian. And she says she always likes to see when an author takes the time to thank librarians because it's really nice and librarians do a lot of work. And so she always wants to give them credit for having that thought, which I confess I have never, it has never occurred to me to do that in writing acknowledgments to my books, but it sure will from now on. So she said she checked the acknowledgments and she saw my name. So I was very confused at first because I thought, what obscure formal poetry collection have you been reading, Kathleen? But of course, no, she had been reading The Optimists by Brian Platzer and was stunned by it. She and I had a wonderful conversation about the characters in it and Brian's handling of this thorny question of what it means to lead a good life or to reach one's potential, or on the other hand, what it might mean to waste one's life or to come up short, because that is all, of course, what The Optimists deals with, not in abstract philosophical terms, but by recounting the stories of these characters who were just thoroughly unforgettable. The one she had gotten into her head. I mean, she was really, of course, taken with Rod Keating, the narrator, and in Contra Paul Muldoon's wife, arguably the true subject of the novel, but also his obnoxious, ridiculous, perhaps morally repugnant, but totally infectious friend Richie as well. And she said she found really poignant and oddly convincing the narrator's claim that it is possible to have a very sincere friendship with someone you despise, as he seems to have with Richie. So great conversation, and it reminded me of how actually good Brian is, and not just because he's my friend. So do go, if you have not, read The Optimists. Go buy it. Go give it a rating and a review on Amazon, on Goodreads, and spread the word. Thank your librarians. Go tell your librarians to order it if they have not yet. But most importantly, go. But my rule personally, I mean, I think anybody who is inclined to borrow from a library should borrow from a library. My personal rule when it comes to buying books is I will buy, I think it's always fine to buy used books if the author is dead, if it's unavailable otherwise. But if the author's alive, I try to buy new. So the reason it has taken me a while to get this episode out is that I have been absorbed all week week and then some, in doing revisions for this musical that I'm working on with Anne Marie Thompson, excellent poet, and wife of Nick Friedman, also excellent poet, and Ian Brandon, who's a British composer. So we've been working on this musical for a little while, and he's doing a workshop in London this week, so we had to go back and actually make it make a little bit of sense. So that's what I have been consumed with. But I did want to talk some about my trip to Austin. I went with my girls, Joanna and Josie and Ellie, our daughters, and it was lovely. I'd never been to, I don't think I'd ever been to Austin. I think I was briefly in El Paso as a kid for a mission trip. We went to El Paso so we could do a mission trip to Juarez for my Catholic church, because the population of Juarez is, of course, all already Catholic, pretty much. But of course, that's I think that's what good mission trips are. It's not you're not just going to spread the word of your faith. You're going to, hopefully, do some good deeds. We did a good deed. We whitewashed a church. That's what we were just like. That's what we did. We just whitewashed a church and got intestinal sickness and left. But this trip to Austin was much more fun than that. We saw the Bats. We saw Barton Springs. We saw the Blanton Museum. And I want to talk a little bit about the Blanton, but we also saw some writer friends. We saw Rachel Monroe, who's an excellent nonfiction writer, writes these long investigative essays you should certainly check out, and Stephanie Macias, who is an editor and a writer of short stories. And, of course, we saw not only Elijah Perseus Blumoff of Versecraft, but his family, who are based in Austin. His dad, Neil, is a rabbi there. His mother, Anne, is I realize Rabbi's wife, in addition to being a nurse and a reader and various other things, and running a very busy household. Her children are grown, but some people are still living there, and there are a lot of dogs, and there are a lot of people who come through, particularly the night I was there. But I think Rabbi's wife is a pretty intense job in its own right. And then, of course, we also saw Vivian and her husband Seamus, and Emmet and his girlfriend Bennett, and Elijah's wife Lara as well, who was looking lovely and poised and overwhelmed by in-laws, which is, that's the way it goes. We were there for the Seder supper. I'd been to a Seder supper once as a child, and it was in a mixed, my uncle married a Jewish woman, and so they did a Seder, but it was sort of a, mixed family with, and I think they were basically Reform. So it was not nearly as, the dope was not nearly as uncut as it was on April 1st. We went to the Blumoff's house. They have Seder there every year, and it's a family Seder, but it's also, they had 20 to 25 maybe people there in all, maybe more. I think sometimes they have as many as 30. I don't know if there were quite that many the night we went. It was just my daughter Josie and my older daughter Josie. I told her ahead of time that, so she, she at some point at school, she was asked what they were supposed to, she and her classmates were supposed to say what they are. What are you? Which is an odd way of putting a question having to do with belief or religious tradition. But they were asked, what are you? And she said she didn't know what to call herself. She could talk about gods and beliefs, and she's very interested in all these things and knows a decent amount about them for a 12-year-old. But she didn't know what to call herself. So I said if she's ever asked again, she can just say, I'm an existentialist, which I figured is not quite entirely accurate. I'm not a great fan of Sartre's thinking. I do think he's a pretty good playwright and novelist, but I don't love his philosophical commentary on existentialism qua existentialism. But I figured that would at least shut up whatever grown-up had presumed to ask my daughter what she is. But she knows about religion. We've certainly talked a lot about it, but she has been raised without religion. And she was initially nervous, she said, because she didn't want to show disrespect for the Blumhoff's tradition. And I reassured her we were guests, we had been invited, they wanted to share this with us. We would not be, disrespectful. We would be observing in a couple of senses, right? Both because what's the old stand-up joke? Christians celebrate, Jews observe. We would be participating in their observance of the Passover, the beginning of Passover, but we would also be observing as outsiders, as Gentiles. And so what I told her, and what I entirely expected myself, was that we would go, we would be silent, respectful Gentile listeners. We're not part of the family. We're not part of the religion. We're not part of the community in Austin. Even there were some non-Jews who were local. So we're outsiders upon outsiders, and we should do our best to go unnoticed. Was my recommendation to her, and that's what I expected. I had met Neil Blumhoff before, Rabbi Blumhoff, but I was thoroughly choked when I met him again because I called him Neil and immediately felt like I should have called him Rabbi. I get very uneasy around religious authorities, I think. Not because I've not spent plenty of time around them, but because I have spent plenty of time around them. And that was something that I learned a lot, because it turned out my preparation, what I told Josie, what I expected myself, was almost entirely wrong. So this was the Blumhoffs are conservative Jews. Like if you were to say you're a conservative Christian, that tends to mean something a little more having to do with social conservatism or political conservatism. Conservative Jews really they have a conservative interpretation of Jewish tradition, but that doesn't seem to have much to do with politics. They do, for example, it does seem to be the case that they don't unisexify all of the references to men in the Jewish tradition. And there are a lot. There's a lot of the men do this, and if there are this many men, and men versus women in this way or another. They do not seem to apply this to their sense of how human beings should behave in their lives in general, but it does seem to be part of the religious tradition, although there was a teenage girl wearing a yarmulke, a kippah there. I wore one as well, but traditionally only men wear a head covering. So what was this thing? It was about 4 hours of singing in Hebrew. It was a lot more than that, but there's a book, it's called a Haggadah. It's written right to left, opens on the left side. It's written in Hebrew with English translations on face, on the facing pages. And it walks through the entire meal, which Rabbi Blumhoff sang throughout, in many, if not most cases, accompanied by the rest of the participants, excluding Josie and me. We didn't know. There were a few little phrases we sang here and there when we picked them up, but for the most part, we did not sing in Hebrew. The Seder is a sort of a ritualized rehearsal of the Passover story. The Hebrews were captive in Egypt. They were enslaved. They were ultimately freed by the God of Abraham under the leadership of Moses. He petitioned Pharaoh numerous times. There were a few confrontations with staffs and snakes and so on, but ultimately the God of Abraham, the gods of the Egyptians are the story in the Torah does acknowledge some degree of Egyptian divinity and Egyptian magic. It's just that the God of Abraham is a lot stronger, like a lot stronger. So he imposes 10 horrible plagues on the Egyptian people. Pharaoh keeps relenting and then having his heart hardened again by the same God of Abraham. Ultimately, they suffer the death of the firstborn, and that plague, the Hebrews have been present for all the others, but the plague of the death of the firstborn was deemed too harsh to be imposed on the Hebrews themselves by their own God. So they were all instructed to. There's some specific ritual, but basically they painted lamb's blood over the lintels of their houses, over the entryways of their houses, and that was the signal to the angel of death to pass over. So it killed the firstborns of all of the Egyptian houses, but it spared the firstborns of the Hebrew houses because they had been instructed to mark their doorways. So this is the Passover. This is the grace that is celebrated in this tradition. Seder is held on the, I think, first and second night of Passover. It's numerous nights. This is about as far as my knowledge goes. Eventually, of course, the Hebrews fled Egypt. Pharaoh's heart was hardened yet again after he finally let them go, and he gave chase. And I was asked to summarize all this, by the way, at the table myself, among other things. I'll get to that. But to the best of my fuzzy memory from the last time we read the Torah a few years ago, he and his soldiers all pursued the Hebrews. Moses had parted the Red Sea. The Hebrews passed through the Red Sea and then got to the other side, and the Egyptians pursued them in, at which point the sea fell in on them and they all drowned. That's the occasion of the Passover. There's singing, there's eating, there's drinking, there's storytelling. So all of this is part of the ritual. It's 4 hours or 3.5, 4 hours in all, including some sort of talk amongst yourselves, loose, unstructured time in the middle, but it is all part of the script, the Haggadah script is that we go through. And this was, we went through, we didn't even do the whole thing. Like I realized we were skipping some parts. So I realized, like, for being a conservative Jewish Seder, so here was the thing. The ceremony had a great deal of sincerity, enthusiasm, structure, ritual, commitment, and soulfulness. I want to talk a little more about soul. But there was effectively no reverence, no solemnity. So I am an asshole. I provoke people. I get under people's skin. I'm very bad at keeping my mouth shut and behaving, and I was very bad at this in my time as a practicing Catholic. But I'm trying to be very respectful of especially of other people's religions, and so my assumption was I should approach this with great reverence and deference, and just yes sir my way through. If anything, if I was called on to say anything at all, which I did not expect to be, I was called on to say a lot. We were all called on to say a lot. At one point, Elijah and I had to improvise poems. We had to collaboratively improvise a limerick. Elijah read an original poem of his. Elijah did some impressive performance all around. That was Josie's big takeaway. She said it was a lot of fun. She loved it. But her biggest, the headline of the whole event for Josie was, wow, Elijah has an amazing voice, which he does. That is true. He does have an amazing voice. But it was raucous and lively. It was also extremely irreverent. So people were bickering and complaining and joking and teasing and mocking throughout, while there was also religious singing in another language. There was also lots of ritual, dripping out of the drops of wine to symbolize the plagues, and dipping of the egg in the salt water to symbolize the Red Sea, and eating of the bitter horseradish to symbolize the years of suffering, and the apples and honey to symbolize, I think the apples and honey are I forget, there's a Hebrew name for it, the the sweetness of the promised land. I want to say, I don't remember. I learned this from my friend David as a kid. But also apples and honey with a little horseradish and on an unleavened bread, on a cracker, on a matzah, tastes pretty good. I think you also are supposed to put some lamb in it, and there's a little bit of some other kind of sauce or something, but pretty good. I'm not a big food guy. I'm not big on food. So food was good. Josie loved the lamb. They did a good job with the lamb stew, especially. I think she particularly liked. I had some fish cakes, pretty good. I'm not a big food guy, but it was good. I mean, it was an extraordinary feat to not just cook for all these people, but like host all these people, because it was a lot of people, and it was not a big house. It was a house for a family of 5, but it was not a big house, and it didn't have like a giant room with a giant table. It was all very jerry-rigged. It was all very, kind of patched together and improvised, and the walls were just covered with books. It felt very homey and familiar to me in that way. There were there's a dog house. I love it didn't have a dog house. It was a house of dogs, which I love. They were big dogs though. Rhodesian Ridgebacks, big, beautiful dogs. They were mostly out of the way for the ceremony, but we got to meet them, love them. But it's, it was a wild, it was just sort of barely controlled chaos. Hosting this many people is crazy. Hosting this many people, feeding this many people, organizing a religious ceremony that is also an elaborate meal with all of these people. It was crazy. It's a crazy feat to pull off. So, truly had to salute Anne for that. And everyone who helped her, Vivian and Emmett and Elijah and all of their significant others. And Neil. I mean, the performance he gave was basically like giving a 4-hour Broadway show performance, because he was singing at full voice for 4 hours. He looked totally exhausted afterward, but and rightly so. But he was not just singing; he was also emceeing. So this was something that I think it took me a second to adjust my expectations, because growing up Catholic, there was a lot of irony and facetiousness and irreverence, a lot of irreverence, sometimes to the point of blasphemy, a lot of the profane as well as the sacred. Family family parties or conversations could be very lively, very intense. So it's not that I was not familiar with irreverence in a religious context, but I think I was not familiar with reverence in a ceremonial context, because as messy as the Catholics I grew up with were, the rituals were quite controlled. The ceremonies, the sacraments were quite controlled, and there was a great deal of solemnity. I think sometimes that solemnity throws people off. Like, I do think that there's a little bit of a mistake people sometimes make in thinking that because there's such seriousness to the affect in Catholic ritual that there's not a beating heart there. But there really is. It is. It's just that there's not. You don't crack jokes during the ceremony. I mean, there are exceptions, right? There are occasionally, in very, very particular moments or very specific contexts, there will be a moment where there's a little bit of irreverence in the midst of an actual religious ceremony. There are always homily jokes, but that is a little different, and they're not. They are seldom actually questioning the priority of the ceremony itself. Whereas the jokes and there were like people complaining about the Blumoff's house in the middle of Neil's blessings. His own children made fun of him openly. Elijah, I will say, was a very, very good, dutiful eldest son. Held it down. They were all quite lovely. Vivian was particularly wonderful with my daughter. Really, they had a lovely time talking about musicals, especially. But But especially Vivian and Annette were very irreverent, very, teasing and mocking the rabbi while he was being a rabbi. Vivian's husband apparently is comfortable. I think Vivian's husband and Emmett's girlfriend are both pretty long a part of the family. So I kept trying. He called on everybody. He called on me a fair amount, and I kept trying to answer as briefly and respectfully as I could. But it took me a while to realize that is not what was called for. That in fact, the soulfulness of the Seder was in part was built on the total lack of reverence. And that in a way, the mockery or the teasing or the undercutting of all of the ceremony, of all of the ritual eating and blessing and praying and singing and storytelling, all of that, it was understood to be part of it. That you were not threatening the ceremony by mocking it. You were, in fact, more thoroughly participating in it. There's some joke a friend told me about the Jewish tradition just being 4,000 years of kvetching, and it's a joke, but I think there also is some grain of truth to that. And it really did seem that even in the more sincere moments of the ceremony, part of what was expected was interpretation and reinterpretation. All of the food we ate had symbolic corollaries in the events of the Passover story, but also the Seder itself has ritual components. There are the questions the four children ask, or there are three children ask questions. There's the wise child, the contrary child, the simple child, and the child who does not know how to ask at all. The wise child says some suck-up question like, what are the meanings of all of the things we do tonight? And then the contrary child says, he says something like, why is all this so important to you? And it's the you that's understood to be the contrary part of what he's saying. And then the simple child, by the way, is totally where my heart is. Like I go with the simple child. The simple child's question is, what is all this? Which I feel like is the question I always want to ask in every context I'm in. What is all this? What the fuck is going on? And then, of course, the child who doesn't know how to ask at all. But like we went through those questions, and there are ritual answers, and there's Hebrew and there's English, but then also part of the ritual was then discussing what these four children were, what it meant for there to be four children. And allegorical interpretations were favored, psychological interpretations were favored. It wasn't just that we were talking about the events of the Passover and the ways in which those might be allegorically or symbolically interpreted. We were also interpreting the components of the Seder supper, and we were interpreting the components of the stories told in the Midrashim, which the rabbi described as fan fiction, further elaborations or spin-offs or alternate versions of stories from the Torah. All of these were subject to interpretation, and even previous interpretations were subject to interpretation. A lot of the answers that especially Neil's children offered would be basically an answer that was a mockery of the question. I honestly, I felt a little scandalized at first because it was just so alien to my own experience. And I think part of this is because I was trying to differentiate what are the distinctions. So one distinction is not every Jewish family has a father and rabbi who are the same person, or I think for the Reform Jews, a mother and rabbi maybe. That's different. Like the rabbi is the dad in this case. So there's a special immersion and intimacy that his kids have with him there. But also it did demonstrate to me like a real difference between a religion in which the priests marry and a religion in which they don't. Because while, like Catholic priests, setting aside the bad ones, do have a certain immersion in the community. My dad growing up, his family would frequently, bring a priest along on a family vacation, or put a priest up in the house at various times. Both my dad and my mom's family actually had a lot of like very close involvement with priests in the family. They were part, would eat with parishioners and be part of their lives when they were sick, when they were married, when all sorts of important moments. But they're not part of the family. And even when a child becomes a priest, right? Even when one of your children becomes a priest, he is still your child, but he is in a sense separate. There is something that he is in some way set apart. And especially when he puts on the garments, there's a partition that comes up. I don't really say that as an endorsement or a criticism, but I do think it's an accurate observation that especially in the midst of a ceremony, in the midst of a ritual, in the midst of a sacrament, a priest is a special figure, and there is a certain solemnity warranted, both toward him and toward the matter at hand. And that just was not the case at all at the Seder. Now, I imagine that in the synagogue, it's a little different. I imagine there are plenty of other Jewish ceremonies and rituals in which it's different. But it did seem to me that this was not just because he was their dad, and this was not just because it was a Seder in a house that is also a family meal. It did seem to have something to do with like the character of the tradition, that all of this kibitzing and mockery and questioning is part of doing it right. And even when at one point I was, he did call on me to do a handful of things, including at one point there was a ridiculous song. This song, it is hard to convey to you what it was like to have this song performed, because this is the thing. Like it was very fun. It was very lively. It was very familial. Like it felt humbling to be brought in that intimately, because it was also sort of, there was a nakedness to the whole thing. Like this is just like, I want to give you a sense of what it was like when this happened, because it was a long ceremony, a lot of things happening, a lot of back and forth, a lot of riddles and questions and interpretations and revisions and laughter and eating and drinking, and then at the end it ended with this crazy song in English. I mean, I think there's a Hebrew version, but we sang it in English, and it was a certain a particular rendering of it. There were a bunch of the Haggadahs were all spread around, and not all the translations matched. The version that was sung was not the version that was in front of me, but it was sort of a paraphrase. In tone, in general style and sound, and in anthropomorphized embarrassingness, but also in like musical intensity and impressiveness, here is what it was like. This isn't what happened, but this is very close to what it felt like when it happened, because I don't know this song. I'd never heard it before. It is a traditional song. It is, as I think Anne was the one who compared it to the old lady who swallowed a fly, where was one animal kills another animal, eats another? I forget what it is. And then it ends with the angel of death, and then it ends with God himself. But it's mostly animals and some other elements along the way, fire as well as some other things. At every one of these items, it's a repetitive song. Somebody's supposed to make a sound, and then the sound gets repeated throughout every time the animal or the item gets the force of nature, whatever it is, gets mentioned. That sound gets repeated throughout the whole song, through all of the many, many repetitions. So it was very much like a child, like barnyard song, but the sound of it and the intensity of it and the surprisingness of it when it happened was very similar to if Neil had, sitting around a table, you've had a few glasses of wine, or for Josie and me, glasses of grape juice, and kosher meal, and it's a little crowded, it's a little noisy, but it's pleasant company. And then Neil, at the head of the table, turns to Elijah at his side and says, "Elijah, you don't happen to know a bullfrog, do you? And then imagine Elijah with a beautiful, operatically trained voice at absolute top volume, belts out with 100% emotional commitment. Jeremiah was a bullfrog. Like just imagine that just busting out suddenly with no more introduction than it wasn't. He was something like whatever the first line of the song was. The dad asked some jokey version of that, and Elijah took the cue and just broke into this song that lasted for like 5 minutes, and then everybody was called on to participate. It was a little breathtaking and a little embarrassing and a little just overwhelming in general. And it seemed like this was all as it was supposed to be. Like it was all with enormous soul and zero solemnity. But even I felt bad because I had been trying to defer all night, and then trying sort of to play the game a little more. But even when I was put on the spot and without thinking, I said something that amounted to as much as God doesn't exist. I said something to this effect when prompted with a challenge from Neil. And because I put my statement in the correct form of the ritual, of the phrasing of the ritual of the song, he seemed pleased and accepted it and absorbed it. That there was no challenge so long as it sort of allowed the ritual, allowed the ceremony to be what it is, that could not be incorporated into this tradition. And there was discussion of some part. I think there was we did at one point go out. There are a couple of moments where you're supposed to open the door of the house. There's one for Elijah. There's one for you go out on the lawn. And I quite like this. You go out on the lawn. It's all in Hebrew, but the point is you're supposed to go out on the lawn. And every time you do the Seder, it's the full moon, because as Neil pointed out, that's what determines the timing of the Seder. So every time you go out, it's the full moon. You go out on your lawn. You go out in the front yard. And you were supposed to, as part of the tradition, you were supposed to go outside and basically shout in Hebrew at the neighborhood, "Hey, we're Jews here, come and get us," basically. Like, it's a challenge in the face of all of the, centuries and millennia of persecution that Jews have faced, to say, like, yeah, here we are, which is pretty fucking metal, as Elijah would say. There was another moment which we did not do, but we talked about, because again, it felt like the whole thing was like half part dad jokes, part religious ritual, part musical concert, and part college seminar. But there's another moment apparently where the tradition is, and I don't know how old this tradition goes. I think it just goes back to the Middle Ages, where you're supposed to open your door specifically to expose to expose the blood libel, because there was a blood libel that Jews made the matzah with the bones or the blood of Christian children. Obvious, disgusting, libel, source of a lot of terrible persecution. But the point is that you're supposed to open your door to say, like, hey, no, this is regular old, flour matzah. We didn't open the door because it seemed like it wasn't necessary to prove that we weren't making the matzah with bones and blood. But we did talk about it and talked about what that would mean. And then again, if there were allegorical interpretations, if there were other ways of understanding this sort of challenge or this sort of ritual exposure. Yeah, I left a little bit dizzy, and I left thinking a few things. Josie loved it, but she was also exhausted. We got out there at 11 something, and riding back with her to the Airbnb, I thought, it's not that I did this a lot as a kid. I definitely didn't do a full-length conservative Seder supper a lot as a kid, but a large portion of my childhood was spent in religious ritual, in religious talk, in prayer, group prayer, private prayer, family prayer, mass, various other ritual, confession, learning about how to do all of the rituals and sacraments, baptisms, weddings and funerals, and what's the Larkin line, of course, weddings and births and deaths and thoughts of these, marriage and births and death. But just like thousands of hours of my childhood were spent being in the midst of and to varying degrees participating in religious time spent in a way that it would not have been spent if there were not at the root of it a committed belief in God, and a commitment sometimes that held true more for the group than for any individual within the group. But it was time committed to God and to the orientation of man toward God and all the different qualifications that a Catholic might make. And just the thought I had was like, this was something, they do this every year. Neil obviously is a religious leader. He does this all the time. But even in a different tradition, this was so much a part of my upbringing, and it's not at all a part of Josie's. Like I thought, again, I spent thousands of hours doing various religious things, even something as small as like the ritual lighting of the Advent calendar with my family in every night in December. All of the blessings and graces and prayers and, what was the slogan my youth group leader used to have? We begin all things in prayer. There's so much of that in my childhood, and there's none of that in Josie's. And yeah, I thought, I'm very glad to be sparing her a lot of the stuff I got from Catholic school. I'm very glad to be sparing her a lot of that stuff, especially as a girl. I think it could be pretty poisonous for some of the girls I knew. But this got to make a difference, right? It's got to make a difference. And I think it's probably not all good or all bad. Like a lot of that time I think is probably not well spent, the ritual time. I spent an enormous amount of my childhood bored, and I think that is probably pretty unique. I think you probably you're doing your job right if your childhood is largely boring, right? You want at least if your childhood is not, if you don't spend a lot of time being bored as a kid, it's probably because something really horrible is happening. But yeah, she doesn't have that, and it's just there's no way that doesn't have an effect. And hopefully part of the effect is that she's a little more emotionally, physically, sexually, psychically healthy than I was and am. But yeah, surely something else is also, she lacks something as a result of that. And it was, it was thinking about exactly this, thinking about what religion offers one totally apart from the question of God's existence, or even the question of morality, what it offers you by way of ritual. That was very on my mind when I read the recent Victoria Moule essay, Do Religious Poets Have an Advantage, I think is the way she put it. And that to me seemed like really the right framing. I thought it was an excellent essay. I was very excited. I immediately wrote to her, and she's going to come talk next week. We're going to have a conversation this coming week, and so that I will record that for you. I'm very much looking forward to it. I won't belabor it too much here, but I was thinking about that very much when we went the next day to the Blanton Museum. So the Blanton Museum is an art museum in Austin. It's architecturally really cool, just like a really, really fascinating building. Gorgeous rocking chairs. I looked at the rocking chairs because they were like these really weird, modern, bright yellow rocking chairs, like dozens of them, just scattered all around the plaza outside. I looked them up because I thought, my dad would really love one of those, and they're $1,600 each. But yeah, beautiful museum, some wonderful art inside, and some less wonderful art inside. They had a digital art exhibit that it was basically, there were three categories of art I saw there in the digital art exhibit. All of it was sort of technically impressive, but one category was interactive art, where my daughters loved that. Like, they would stand in front of a screen and they could move, and the display on the screen would respond to their movements in various ways. And there were several variations on that basic theme, and they all loved that. And I thought was fine. I don't find it especially interesting artistically, but it was like a cool thing for kids to be able to interact with. Great, fine, whatever. Then there was another category of art that was art that used digital projections, screens, programming, software to create images, some still, some moving, somewhat kind of a hybrid, that were either displayed or projected, or displayed and projected. And these were all images that had been created by a person. They looked like versions of drawings. Some of them were really, really beautiful and rich. Some of them were a little simpler, a little more like comic booky. But like, those are my favorite. Those are the ones I thought, like, okay, I'm looking at art here. I'm looking at something that I can understand as art and getting like, some of it's better, some of it's worse. Like, this is art. I get it. I understand it. I know what game we're playing here. The third category, and the one that I found bone-chilling, was the category that was art authored by AI programs. So the artists had either designed a program or borrowed a program and then given it certain inputs, or given it a range of inputs and a range of outputs, and then let it go. And then the images, in most cases the moving images that the AI had authored, were the images displayed in the museum. And those, I just made my skin crawl. And I didn't spend time with those. But there's a lot of really great art in the Blanton. My three favorites, I saw a wonderful little teeny Winslow Homer watercolor of a woman walking down the street. It was just like tucked in a corner. It was like very easy to miss. Tiny Winslow Homer watercolor. I think it was called Along the Road. Is that it? Really exquisite. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. So they've got an image of it here. It's really beautiful. Oh, this is a very good reproduction. So you can see you can blow it up. It is quite small, the original. I'll link to that. It's very beautiful. And then Andrew Wyeth had a painting of his I'd never seen before. It was a porch facing out to the sea. All right. Well, it's beautiful in person. None of these images look very good of it. So I think it's called Sea Legs. It's a two rocking chairs facing the sea. A man sitting in one of them. The other one's empty. He looks like a haggard old sea dog, and most of the canvas is just a formless gray, but it's very much a created gray. It's very haunting painting. Those were wonderful. I did not take photos of those dumbly, because I went through that gallery really quickly with my daughters. My wife gets impatient. She doesn't like to spend too long in a museum. The other three I really loved were two that Elijah would have liked, and one that he would have hated. Ones he would have liked were Antonin Merci's La Toilette de Diane, which is a bronze sculpture of a nude Diana, which is just wonderful from all sides. It doesn't have a preferred side. It looks just as good from every side. Her hair is, she's wrapping her hair around one of her wrists. The drapery is falling down her thigh, and it's very subtle that the drapery is what, of course, allows her. The reason, like, statues so often that are freestanding of a single human figure, the reason so often they've got, a dress or a drapery around their legs, or like the David is leaning against a stump. It's because you got to find some way to hold up all that weight. So she's got some drapery sliding down her leg, very, very, casually, and it still feels very light, despite being the base that allows the statue to stand up freely as it does. Really exquisite. That was Antonin Merci. And then a painting called the Martyrdom of Saint Catherine of Alexandria. Here, I'll just read the first couple sentences of the caption that the museum presented. This is Mattia Preti, the Martyrdom of Saint Catherine of Alexandria, from the mid 17th century. This painting represents the moment just before St. Catherine's beheading. After the spiked wheels broke into pieces and failed to kill her, the executioner's sword swings to end her life. As she looks up in praise, an angel descends to crown her with laurel and to give her the palm of martyrdom. So it's very kind of muddy color, muddy painting. It looks almost unfinished in spots, but all of this. The focus of this whole painting is on this woman who's kneeling on a platform with a soldier behind her, and a headsman has, resting his hand on her shoulder and swinging his sword. And it's almost, and again, it's where the painting looks almost sketchy. His sword is moving. You see the shape of the sword moving in the air. And everyone is staring up at her, watching for the moment the blade strikes her neck, and she's just staring up. And there's a huge angel on a cloud reaching down, and nobody sees it but her. It's just a tremendous kind of kinetic tension in the composition of this painting. I thought it was pretty stunning. And then the one Elijah would hate was an abstract piece by Joan Mitchell called Rock Bottom, which is mostly blue on white. And I feel like the privilege of being ignorant of visual art is getting to enjoy modes of visual art that I would surely sneer at were I a visual artist. But I really fucking love some abstract art. Not a whole lot, but some. And I think it often has to do with being at the edge of something. It's not that I like visual art abstract art that sort of looks like something. It's more that I like it to feel like I'm most touched by it when it feels like it's responsible to the real world. It's not wholly cut free and living in the land of cartoons, or living in the land of pure form. And maybe the bonds holding it to earth are emotional or psychic. Rock Bottom carries an implied narrative with it, obviously. But whatever they are, they're there. I found that painting quite gripping. I had to return to those three I spent a lot of time with. The other one I spent a fair amount of time with was a very large work of art, probably the largest work of art at the museum. It is, in fact, an entire building called Austin. It's out in the courtyard. It's about 2,700 square feet. It's one story. It is a kind of a squat, cross-shaped concrete building that is not a chapel, but resembles a chapel. So this is Austin. This was a commission. It's designed by Ellsworth Kelly. It is whitish. I think that's concrete. It looks like poured concrete. It's very clean, very heavy. Sort of a rounded cross shape, and extremely heavy, tall wooden doors. It's very difficult to open and satisfying to open. And you could easily see it would be, you would almost be, the normal choice, the almost default choice for a public building would be to put some sort of automatic door opener, or even just one of those little pneumatic things that makes it easier to open the door, just eases the burden a little bit. But no, I mean, it seemed very deliberately not the case here. You have to pull it open, and it is quite heavy. You go inside. The inside is all whitewashed. It is dim inside, but there is light. There's natural light. It was a very sunny day when we were there. Perfect day to go. And it's a cross shape, so there are 3 faces. Right? There's one end, the top end, the end which would be the altar, if this were a chapel. That end is sealed over, that has no openings on it. But then the right, the left, and the foot, right where the door is, all have a stained glass design. In 2 of them, they're sort of ring shaped, and in one, it's just 9 squares of glass in a, set in a big square, in a grid. All of the glasses are the glass designs. It's all just solid color panes. They all incorporate the colors of the rainbow. They're almost brutally simple, almost aggressively simple. And then there is a very spare wooden sculpture at where the altar would be, again, if this were a church, where the cross would be if this were a church or a chapel. It's not a cross. It's just a tall, slightly sloping, slightly curved piece of redwood. The wood is quite beautiful. That sculpture felt like it had some choices made there. And then there are paintings that I did not realize are not paintings. There are these big squares lining the walls all along them. They're not very many of them, but they're at regular intervals, these squares. All the squares are the same size, and all of them are either entirely white, entirely black, or black and white in different proportion, with just a slice down the middle or slice to one end, where it's all white on one side of that line and all black on the other. And what I learned only tonight looking it up is that I thought it was paint when I looked at it, because the lighting's sort of dim in there. It's not paint, it's marble. So the white is white marble and the black is black marble. So the whole thing is built very solidly, very expensively. I mean, all construction's never cheap, but this was a $23 million building. No plumbing, no. I don't know that it has any. I think it has no electricity either. I think all the light is natural. Certainly, it feels that way. And it was funny because I wanted to like it. So Ellsworth Kelly is an atheist. You go in, there's decidedly no religion inside, but it is soulless. If the Blumenhof dinner was all soul and no solemnity, this was all solemnity and no soul. It was very heavy. It had all of the elements. It was going through all the motions of a chapel, of a sacred space. And I think he intended it to be, and I think the critics seem to have taken it as a successful secular atheist, space for people to come and rest and meditate and so on. But it has no soul. And standing in there, I talked to Josie about it. I thought I don't believe in God. I don't want to participate in a religion. I don't want to endorse religions for, I think there's so much, I have so many criticisms of religion, so many criticisms of Catholicism. But it felt to me like Kelly sort of missed the point here. Yeah, part of what makes a chapel is the construction, is the weight of it, is the starkness of it, the spareness of it. I mean, I love good design that way. Maybe you think of the beautiful Le Corbusier Chapel. Ronchamp. Was it Ronchamp? Was that it? Very, very strange, spare, white, heavy. I mean, there's no way Ronchamp was not in Ellsworth Kelly's mind when he designed Austin. I mean, so much this had to be in his mind. It is unforgettable. Gorgeous design, but very, very untraditional. Very spare, very stripped down. A lot of primary colors, a lot of small apertures and heavy concrete. But it is a chapel. It is a Catholic chapel. The elements of it are sincere, are faithful. It is imbued with real belief. And I thought about that as maybe being something to do with soul. I mean, the line that obviously immediately came to mind when I felt the dry emptiness of Ellsworth Kelly's building was of course the line from Larkin, "A serious house on serious earth it is." Right? That felt like about as far as Kelly could get. A serious house on serious earth it is. But Larkin goes further, because of course he's talking about going to visit a church as an atheist, and even going to visit a church that's decommissioned, where people don't go anymore. But it matters that they did go. It matters that they did believe. And most of all, it matters, as he says, that they were willing to give their lives to it. This is the last stanza of Churchgoing. Churchgoing is a long poem, and I've gone on longer than I meant to. I'll just read the last stanza here. "A serious house on serious earth it is, in whose blent air all our compulsions meet, are recognized, and robed as destinies. And that much never can be obsolete, since someone will forever be surprising a hunger in himself to be more serious, and gravitating with it to this ground, which, he once heard, was proper to grow wise in, if only that so many dead lie round." But of course, nobody would ever be buried at the Blanton Museum of Art. Maybe somebody would. I don't know. It was funny because I thought I do feel solemnity toward art in a way that I don't toward much in an immediate, sincere way. I'm always willing to show respect and show reverence and show solemnity to honor other people's beliefs. But with art, I feel a direct and immediate personal reverence. And Kelly's chapel felt to me like a kind of a betrayal of that in an odd way. Because even those square paintings, I thought, whose belief is this? Who's poured sweat and blood into this? I don't believe you believe this, Ellsworth Kelly. Show me a stark abstract painting. Show me a severe architectural design. But convince me that somebody believes in it. Austin just feels like the gesture. It's just borrowing some elements from, just stripping out the parts you don't like. It's like a radio edit. It's like a radio edit of religion, taking out all the offensive bits. And I found it offensive, to be honest. Yeah, I thought of the Seder supper because there was soul in it, and that soul is, I think, like there's an unfortunate version of soul that we have. I mean, I think soul is often used in the context of Black American culture, and I think the most unfortunate reading of it becomes a kind of a trivialized proprietariness with regard to Black American culture. That is, like, soul is grooviness, or soul is mojo, or soul is rhythm, or soul is sort of like, white boys got no soul. I mean, I think like fine. And like surely Black American tradition has every right to mock white boys to its heart's content. But it does seem to me that soul is not just the funness of like gospel singers in a black church, right? It's a reservoir of human suffering. When a place, when a person, when a piece of music has absorbed real serious suffering and holds it within it, like an electrical charge, like a body of water, that's soul. And you can combine that with solemnity, or you can separate it from solemnity. But where the Blumenhof dinner had enormous amounts of soul, partly because, and that's where some of the kvetching and the complaints and the, reinterpretations come from. The whole Jewish tradition is a tradition of a reservoir of suffering in scripture, in study, in body, in food, in song, in ritual, in place. It's a chronicle of suffering lived with and dealt with in a way that doesn't prevent life from thriving. And part of that, of course, is humor. Part of that is mockery. Part of that is never forgetting that you're a living being. And there are other ways to carry soul. But yeah, the Kelly Chapel, I thought there's no reservoir of suffering here. There are no dead lying around. Nobody's ever pulled an all-nighter studying here, let alone had a crisis of faith, let alone gotten married or buried or anointed for the priesthood or baptized. No one here has ever had his heart broken. No one believed in these fucking paintings. That's, I don't have clean definitions for all these terms, but this is part of the way I think about passion, which is part of the reason I think that not everybody needs a passion, and following your passion is often very bad advice. Because I define passion as a desire for which one is willing to suffer greatly. If you are willing to pursue your desire past the price of suffering greatly, that's a passion. And that can produce great things and it can produce terrible things. But there was no passion anywhere in that chapel. And it felt like he missed the whole fucking point. Thank you to the Blumenhofs for hosting Josie and me. We were very glad to get to experience the Seder. And the Blanton's wonderful. There's a lot of really good art there, not just the pieces I mentioned. Go see it. If you're in Austin. Go to the Blanton. Go see the chapel. Go see Ellsworth Kelly's chapel. See if you disagree. But I found it soulless, solemn and soulless. All right. Once I am sure there's nothing going on, I step inside, letting the door thud shut. That's part of the problem with this chapel. There was never anything going on. You never have to be sure there's nothing going on because there's never anything going on. I'm going a long time. I will have more poems for you later. I don't know what I'm going to talk about in the Secret Show. I have a few ideas. I may talk about chess some. I've been watching a whole lot of chess. I have some thoughts. But thank you all for listening. If you would like to support the show, you go to SLEERICKETS.com, go to the upper right-hand corner and click Chip In. You can donate money directly right there. You can also, if you would like a copy of my chapbook, The Soft Black Stars, I've got fucking hundreds of them, and I will mail you one for the price of shipping. So if you donate $5 there, I will send you a copy. So give me your address as well. That's if it's in the United States. If it's outside the United States, send me a note and we'll figure something out. SLEERICKETS@gmail.com. Go to SLEERICKETS.com to chip in. Also just for links to everything. And if you would like to sign up for the Secret Show, it's another great way to support what we do here and to get another extra episode every week. Go to SLEERICKETS.substack.com, put your email address in, and I will give you a week's access for free. After that, it's really fucking cheap. And if you would like to give a little extra, you can sign up to become a founding member, and you can actually choose your amount. You can choose how much you want to give. If you would really like to listen to The Secret Show, but you can't afford it, write me at SLEERICKETS@gmail.com and I'll hook you up. Thank you all for listening, and with any luck, I will be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.